There are occasions when the first step towards psychological health and safety is developing resilience within the humans that are a part of an organization. We'll talk with a scholar and former human resource executive that's laser focused on helping humans in organizations with more resilience on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. From Flourish DX, this is the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. Safety at work is more than freedom from physical injury. To be safe, you have to feel safe. Join us each week as we discuss psychologically healthy and safe work in the USA. Welcome to this week's Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. I'm your host, Dr. I. David Daniels, and I want to thank you for tuning in. Each week, we seek to increase awareness of the importance of psychological health and safety by learning from the lived experiences, research, and expertise of our guests, as well as advocating strategies to reduce harm and to minimize vulnerability to psychosocial hazards in the American workplace. As much as any organization has the responsibility of creating a psychologically healthy and safe environment, it'd be kind of naive to suggest that focusing on the resiliency of the people in the organization is not also important. There are real life situations where emotional and even physical survival, it could depend on how resilient an individual can be in situations where psychosocial hazards in the workplace, they just can't be eliminated. There are simply times when the work is complex and the hazards associated, especially with work responsibilities, are outside the control of the organization to fix. There are some jobs you will be exposed to psychosocial hazards. It is the job. So we can't simply continue to talk about it as important as I think it is. Can't continue to talk about fix the organization, fix the organization, fix the organization. It'll never be perfect. So, and it's not a binary choice, fix the organization or help the person be resilient. It actually is both. And our guest for this episode has channeled her experience as an HR executive and a scholar into a focus on helping humans in organizations be more resilient, even in the face of acute or chronic exposure to psychosocial hazards. So my guest today is Dr. Alessandria Polizzi. And my first question to every guest of mine is, who is Alessandria?
Wow, thank you, David. I am a former chief people officer. I've spent 20 years in HR, 30 years in adult education, and I experienced my own burnout. I've seen a lot of toxic workplaces, but my burnout, which I experienced in late 2020, early 2021, really caused me to hit pause and try to explore different ways. There's got to be a better way. And so I turned to the academic research, and that's what took me down this journey of understanding what the causes of burnout are, how we can prevent them, what we do within organizations that accelerates the risk of burnout, psychosocial hazards, and then ways in which we as individuals can build skills and capabilities to be able to bounce back more quickly. And so that's who I am now. I focus on that area, building a mentally healthy workplaces to help businesses thrive. I run my organization, Verdant Consulting. We have 60 affiliates around the globe who've been certified on our program. And we've been fortunate enough to get some recognition. We've been identified as top 20 workplace wellness provider of 2022. And this month we'll be listed on the top 10 change partners for 2022.
Wow, that's a lot. And we're going to dig into some of that because it is really important. And particularly from your background as a human resource executive or a chief people officer. I mean, people have all kinds of names for them, but ultimately, some of them really function the same.
Mm-hmm.
So they change the name, but really what's driving the organization doesn't change much. So it comes across as, it comes across to the people that they expose themselves to as the same thing. And it's been really interesting getting to know you over the last few months that you just kind of come across different than the, than the human resource people that I've met. I pride myself in trying to find folks that do things slightly different, particularly in areas where, it hasn't really worked. I'm not saying that they're bad people. It just hasn't really worked for me. So, so share a little bit to me when you hear the term psychological health and safety, what does that mean to you when you hear that?
So I think about psychological health and safety along similar lines as the World Health Organization's guidelines that they just came out. So it really is two parts. One side is addressing the psychosocial hazards and risks within the organization. These are known hazards. We know what to look out for, etc. And then on the other side is equipping people with the skills to navigate stress in more effective ways by teaching them, number one, what the known stressors are for their role. So you mentioned people working in hazardous workplaces. One of the most psychologically hazardous role you can have in an organization is leading others, right? So we don't equip leaders with that knowledge nor the skills to navigate it. So we do that part as well. And so that's about creating a psychologically healthy workplace. For people who have a psychological or a mental health issue, that's kind of dealing at the crisis end. But we focus on the proactive, just like you look at the physical safety of employees, we look at the psychological health and safety of employees.
Wow. Yes, absolutely. So how does you mentioned again in your answers to the question about who you are, you talked about being a chief people officer and involved in that space for a while. So take us, how do you end up doing that? How do you end up in that space?
Well, so I was a college English professor. That was my first career. And my goal in life is always to make people better through education. And so I taught English as a second language. I taught remedial writing because I wanted to empower people with the ability to express themselves through written and verbal language, right? That was my first focus. And I've just kind of grown from there. I followed that mission everywhere I've gone, be it through helping people be better at the work they do, to help support themselves and their families and have the joy of doing a good job, to creating healthy and vibrant workplaces with the work I've done in these bigger roles that I've held my last two positions. So all of it has been part of you. I like to run towards messes and fix problems. I do. I'm a hold my beer kind of person.
Right.
And so I like to create order out of chaos. And so if I see, what's been interesting and compelling for me in my career has been, where is there the biggest need?
Mm. Mm.
And so that's actually what's been very motivating for me in the role that I have now, is that this is the biggest need. And there aren't a lot of really great, clear, crisp solutions in the marketplace. It's a little messy right now. It's a little all over the place. When I meet people who are creating I'm putting air quotes, psychological safety training, but you can tell they just kind of Googled it. We're not really taking this very seriously. And it's a business critical. I just saw a report actually that came out October 2022 that said that soft skills have a higher correlation to high performance than hard skills. And they've been that way for almost 20 years. It's increased, in fact, in their up to 2018. Who knows where it is now, but probably similar,
Sure.
right? And yet these are the things that we don't focus on. Like there's so much data to support how business critical the work is that you and I do. And yet there just doesn't seem to be a good solid path, methodology, framework, however you want to look at it, to help people solve it.
Wow. And it's kind of, isn't it a shame? Isn't it a shame that so many people end up in roles where they're responsible for other people and they're not prepared for it at all, at
Mm-mm,
all.
mm-mm.
And it's as if, and then their lack of preparedness actually makes it less safe and less effective for the people they're supposed to lead. So it's
And for themselves.
it's the metaphorical blind leading the blind, because
Absolutely. It is.
I don't really know that I don't know, and you don't know either. So we're both lost.
Absolutely. And
We're-
I've got I'm carting around a little bit of imposter syndrome and maybe some
oh,
childhood trauma, and like, I don't know. And I've had bosses I'm trying to emulate or not emulate. And in leadership development, we tend to approach it historically, what I've seen is information equals action. And it's not, this isn't a knowledge issue. This is a tactics issue, right? So,
yes,
all of this focus on like empathy and compassion. Okay, but how?
right,
How?
right.
How am I supposed to do that? And also, I'm a human being who has needs, wants, stresses. Where's where's the part, like, how am I supposed to handle my stuff? And that's what's been missing. So that's what we offer. It's funny you mentioned the comment about HR. Um, so there's 98% of HR is burned out, according to Forbes magazine. And that came from a larger study of other.
Wow,
Yeah, right.
wow.
So, okay, let's just take that apart for a second. One of the symptoms of being burned out is cynicism.
Mm, mm.
So describe to me how most people see HR teams, that they're burned out, and compassion fatigue is another one that impacts HR, right? And so, but guess what we don't talk about in HR?
Compassion, fatigue, and burnout, and our own needs.
Exactly.
Yes,
Exactly.
yes.
So whenever every single time I present this topic on HR in particular, and leaders in particular, the number one comment I get is, I thought it was just me.
Mm,
So it's this well-known but never spoken about issue.
Yeah, it's like the family who knows that you've got that uncle who drinks a little bit too much, but nobody ever talks about it.
The elephant in the room.
And the elephant in the room, and then when the uncle does something really, really awful that we now crosses the threshold. So why weren't we talking about this before that thing happened?
Mm-hmm.
Why did we wait until whatever, till the crash the car, hurt somebody, something?
Right.
The signs and symptoms were there for days, weeks, months, and even years.
Mm-hmm.
But it's like, yeah, let's just act like that's not there and keep it stepping, keep it moving.
That's right. Well, let me look at if I can play on that metaphor a little bit, on the imagery a little bit. So then we all deal with the abuse of the uncle, right? We all deal with the fallout of the uncle, and we wait until crisis to do an intervention, as opposed, and then think about the trauma that then all of the people who are impacted by that uncle take on and spread and spread and spread. So it becomes a cancer within the familiar organization. Just kind of build on that.
Yes.
And I'll just add, interestingly enough, one of the things is, in the 12-step program, you talk about serenity, of learning to identify the things you cannot control, the things you can, and the wisdom to know the difference, right? So that's actually one of the things that can help in that situation as well.
So you mentioned that early on, or at least, sometime in the recent past, that you had an experience of burnout. So one of the things that I do with all of my guests and anybody who will participate is have this, very simple survey. It's a little long, but it's very simple. I ask people, these are some psychosocial hazards. And I didn't even make them up. I simply take them from ISO 45003. Have you been chronically exposed to this? Have you seen this ever before? Do you have no idea what it is? And from that, I slowly but surely trying to see if there's some patterns. I just did this for another organization here recently, and I believe that there are patterns amongst groups, but it's driven by that group. I don't believe that there's going to be this, well, all people, if you do this, it's totally driven by the group themselves, the dynamics they create. So could you share a little bit about, as much as you're willing to share and comfortable sharing, about how you came to the conclusion that you were burned out? Because I think there are a lot of people who are burned out right now and they don't know they are.
No, they don't.
They think they're just, this is what it's like. And I have to. Yeah. So could you share a bit about that?
So I was one of those. I didn't think I was burned out. I thought that I was really crappy at my job. I just was like, God, I suck. because cognitive ability is another symptom of burnout. And so my cognitive ability had declined significantly. But I didn't think it was that bad until I caught wind that my mother and my husband were meeting about my mental health without me. And so that to me was a big sign that I should probably pay attention and take action, that it was
Wow.
beyond what I believed to be the
Wow.
case.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So, but my journey of trying to of bouncing back from that was challenging because again, I didn't find much in the marketplace that met my requirements from being scientifically proven and established. And I wanted skills. I wanted to learn different ways of working, different ways of behaving, tactical skills that I could apply because what I was doing was not working for me. And so I could not find that. I just
Wow.
could not find that. So
Wow.
that's why I started studying it, and that's when I built the training program so that other people wouldn't have to go through what I went through.
Yeah, I find that there are a lot of us, and I'll put myself in that same category. My focus on occupational health and safety is predominantly driven by the fact that a few dozen, I actually used to have a number, and I think my number was low. There are a few dozen people that I work with that I know they got killed at work or died
Mm,
from something that they got at
mm,
work.
mm,
I was present at a couple of them, uh, but they're dead because the organization didn't focus on their health and safety. We talked about it. We didn't do anything about it though. And then the things that we did were ill-informed, reactionary. Uh, the first time I became a safety officer in the fire, I won't mention them because I don't want to cast any shade that way. I got assigned to a position as a chief safety officer with no training whatsoever. As a matter of fact, the person I report to says, well, we're probably going to need to get some certification. Could you find something? So I had to go find it myself. And I found this, this general industry certification program that I went through, and this has been a lot of years ago. But why am I having to figure that out? And I'm the safety guy for my portion of the organization.
yep.
And it's really interesting to hear the fact that it's going on in both on the HR side and the safety. You've got the same thing with safety people. They are burned out. There's a lot of the compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma, all this stuff going on. And think about what happens when something really bad happens in an organization. Who gets called? The safety person and the HR person. And they tend to follow it to the end, and the HR person follows it even further.
Mm-hmm.
And you get exposed to all this, again, traumatic situations and really bad things happen that could have been prevented. They ran into somebody like you early, and we help people get the skills on how to create safe environments for people, not just, well, you have to move this place over and turn this knob. Folks do great at that stuff because that's why they got promoted anyway,
Mm-hmm.
but no training on how to be more resilient as a human being and how to be able
Mm-hmm.
to relate to other people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And so it's funny because when I was just at a DEI conference and in Arizona, and on the panel they were talking about burnout for DEI uh, departments, leads, heads, whatever. And somebody mentioned psychological safety, and one of the speakers said, well, it kind of is, there's no clear guidelines about what it is. And then and these are like heads of HR or heads of DEI. Another one said, well, you'll know it when you have it. It's more of a feeling. And I was just, I see your face. I was like losing my mind, David,
Right.
losing my mind. Cause I'm
Right.
like, there are so many guidelines, right?
Yes.
Like if nothing else, ISO 45003, the World Health Organization. I mean,
Right.
the Surgeon General just came out with one. Like,
Yes.
what are you doing? But I think we think of it as the squishy, like feel goodery. And what you and I are talking about is a structured
Yes.
plan that has been
Yes.
scientifically proven
Yes.
over and over and over again to
Yes.
actually work. And so I think it's just trying to get that knowledge out there is that's the work.
Yeah, and I also find that part of the challenge is getting people to make the connection between the stuff that they already know And this, they may not know that much about it, but there's a connection. It's not, so not only is it out there, it's really not all that difficult either. I mean, it isn't, it's not brain surgery or rocket science. It's not that. But it's also not something you just, I just make this up as I go,
You'll
because
know when you feel it.
well, you might, but then that means luck is not a strategy.
No.
And I'd submit that a lot of organizations and groups out there right now that are psychologically healthy and safe, it's kind of, they're just lucky, because when the right thing comes along, the entire house of cards is going to collapse.
Yeah.
And there has to be the same way that you wouldn't, be okay with, oh yeah, we've got a fire safety thing, but you'll know it when you see it.
Right.
Yeah, when the building burned down, of course
Exactly.
you'll know.
Here you go. Don't catch stuff on fire. That's our plan.
Right.
And if it's hot, run away. That's our plan.
So in your consulting practice and your trainings and such, you talk a lot about this concept of resiliency. So what do you see as the connection between resiliency and psychosocial hazard mitigation or psychological? Where's the connection?
Yeah.
At least in your view.
Yeah. One's organizational, one's individual.
Okay.
Right. So organizationally, we look at psychosocial hazards and risks. We address those structurally. We look at the environment. Again, I love the ISO 45003. So we look at the environment, but then behaviorally and internally, we need to build the skills that help us, one, identify what the specific stressors may be for our role. And then two, build skills based on what's been proven to work that help us manage those stressors, cope and recover from those stressors individually. So if I come to work, with my own baggage, my own biases, I got some, let's just throw in some perfectionism, some imposter syndrome, got a little bit of like fear, flaring up. I'm a fight response. So I'm going to like beat you down. Maybe there's some mobbing happening because I've never felt like I belonged, or these people think they're better than, like, I got all my noise. I can have the most psychologically healthy structure, but my nonsense, my baggage is going to get in the way. And so by helping people build self-reflective skills, then they're better able to bounce back. So we teach it around the framework of, just like you would if you were catching fire, you stop, drop, and roll.
Okay.
So you stop, check in with yourself, self-reflect, get present, what's going on, get curious, etc. Drop, connect to your values and your goals, what's important, what stuff matters, what stuff doesn't. And then you roll forward. You're right, here's my plan, and I'm going to use self-compassion and acceptance and my strengths to move forward.
So that's a thing. It's a real thing.
It's a real thing.
Wow. So what would you say to people that you could do either one? Do you have to do both, or?
Well, I think you really need to do both. But look, you can start with you, right? You can't control what other people do. You can't control what executives decide is worth investing in, but you can sure darn start with you. And then you can make decisions based on your goals and objectives. Do you want to work in a place where that isn't considered to be important? And if not, then you make those changes. Or is there enough for you to be able to thrive and flourish and achieve your goals and live your values, right? So as long as those things are happening, you're in a good place. But if they aren't, then make some other choices.
Yeah, no, I really like the approach that you're taking, because and again, I'm fairly certain I come across to folks that way sometimes, because there's parts of me, depending on which day you catch me, I'll tell folks, look, if it's not working, just leave. Or on the other, I mean, seriously. But that has not always been an option for me either. I mean,
No,
like I said,
no.
that's not an option. But on the other hand, as you said, the organization could be doing all kinds of stuff, and they're working really hard at it. They're sweat dripping and papers flying and training going on. But it's really about me, because the environment itself is not good or bad. It's just for me, because of how I am and who I am.
That's right.
I think in some cases, people have been in these almost negative, traumatic kinds of scenarios, they can't handle kindness
That's
because really because because I've been so traumatized by all the other people that I work with. Your kindness comes across to me as, what do they mean?
exactly.
That can't be real. And so,
Exactly.
but I honestly, that was a bit of a loaded question. I don't think it'll be successful unless you do both. You
Mhm,
can't, it didn't matter which one you start with, but you have to do both the environment and the person,
mhm.
and constantly working on both,
Yes,
you
constantly
know,
working on both, but you
and it
can't.
never stops.
Yeah, absolutely. So, but I mean, if you can't, if you're in a position where you don't feel like you have control over the things around you, then, start with you
Yes. Yes.
and then make a decision. Everybody can make the decision to leave. It's it's the repercussions of that we have to weigh, right?
Sure.
So
Absolutely.
is the financial trade-off, is the risk to my health insurance, my family, okay, what's most important? What are my goals? What are my values? And what am I getting from staying and what would I lose if I left?
Yes. Absolutely.
And then you can make a decision.
So when you have these conversations with um, more traditional human resource folks, what are some of the challenges and some of the the opportunities you've seen to kind of get them to come around?
I don't have a problem getting HR to come around. Full stop. Never. Not had one. Where I had what they say is, I need your help convincing my executive team.
Say more about that.
So there has not been, I mean, maybe 1% of the people I've spoken to within HR have said, oh, this, because look, if every time I say some of the data points, like a high percentage of our executive teams have been shown to have mental health issues, like 70%.
Mm.
Everyone goes, yeah, that checks out. Okay. Then what are we doing? What are we doing about it? Right. So no, they get it. They get it. Being empowered to make a change,
Mm.
not always, not always the situation. So you mentioned CHRO versus CPO. There actually is a difference. The CHRO is more focused on administration, policy, what's the handbook say, legal, like structure, like they're more usually tend to be more focused on that side. And then the chief people officer or sometimes chief culture officer tends to be more on what's our people strategy? How are we really unlocking the potential of our biggest investment? How are we
Mm.
creating engagement and retention and helping people grow? Right. So
Mhm.
that tends to be the difference. But if you're a CPO in a role where they're expecting you to be CHRO, it's going to be a struggle.
Yes. Yes. Yeah. That's an excellent. Again, I don't know that I understood the distinction. I honestly have thought that it was simply a name change for some, because again, we all tend to react or respond to our own experience. I've met a lot of human resource professionals who are actually personnel people.
Mhm,
They are,
mhm,
because they came up in the personnel system.
mhm,
That's
mhm.
what they know. That's what they've
Yep,
been trained
yep,
to do. And it's not as if while they're reviewing the training requests for everybody else that they actually get any.
no,
They don't. Oh yeah, well,
absolutely not.
yeah. We just want you to make sure that everybody else gets to their thingy. But what about me?
Yep,
I heard someone say recently that we can only give, and certainly only give, our best out of our abundance.
mhm,
And we're asking people to give solace and support and comfort when they're not any of those things.
no, and
They're struggling, really.
actually, and one of the key issues in the HR field is loneliness.
Mm.
Because you can't really make friendships, you can't be perceived as having biases, right? You can't be perceived as having favorites. You have to withhold a lot of information that you have because you hold a lot of confidential information. Often you're referred to as the fun police, right? Because make sure
Mm.
people are not making choices that will impact them in a way that creates harm. And so, like you said, from abundance, the other thing is that you're often underfunded and under-resourced because you're considered an overhead, you're considered a cost.
Right.
Whereas the maintenance of any capital investment in an organization, if I bought a piece of machinery and I spent a good percentage of our revenue on, that's a big investment. I'm going to maintain that. I'm not going
Right.
to just let it run
Right.
without oil in it. Like I'm not
Right.
just going to let it run while
Right.
it's smoking,
Right.
but I'll do the same thing for people.
Right. 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 Yeah. I I often share my experience being in the fire rescue service. So we get up, go to a fire station, show up at, whatever, it's 7, 8 o'clock in the morning. The first thing you did when you got there, first thing is you check your equipment out. Do I have air in my SCBA? Does the truck have tires in it? Are all the tools where they're supposed to be? And then you line up and they kind of tell you what the day's going to be. And it occurred to me as I was, sort of tail end of my, active career anyway. Have we ever checked these human beings out? There are some folks who came to work that day that had not slept well, that their blood pressure was high. We would send people to the hospital. Matter of fact, that person with high blood pressure would go out to someone's house and put them in the hospital for the very same blood pressure. But they never checked it. We just check it. And again, obviously a lot of that is physical. But as I start to think about it now, psychologically, so last shift they responded to a fatality where 3 people were murdered or whatever. And 3 days later, they're sitting right there. Oh yeah, we're right back to business again. And again, this is what we were talking about earlier. I mentioned that there are some occupations that you will never remove the trauma. It's the job.
It's the job.
It's the job. And sometimes if it doesn't look like it's a physical kind of thing, we forget. So that HR person who gets to sit down with someone and explain their benefits because their spouse just died, or their kid was, kidnapped and murdered and thrown in the. I mean,
or RIF. Like if I'm handling a reduction force and I have to sit down with you and tell you after 25 years with this company where you've brought cookies every year and you've done this and we brought our kids to work and we've done that, you are no longer a part of it. And then I'm supposed to just I don't feel good about that. Right.
Right.
You didn't come into work. I didn't start working so I could lay people off or let people go or have to, I have to fire you because you got drunk at the party and you decided to do something you shouldn't have. Right. That's right. That doesn't feel good. That doesn't feel good. And here's what happens. And I think in many fields, we tell ourselves, well, that's the job. So I shouldn't feel anything about it. And that's the faulty thinking. That's the thing that gets us to burnout. We feel we are humans. It is natural. Knowing what's coming, knowing that you have emotions and emotions are real. Emotions are things that you need to pay attention to. The thoughts and feelings may not be real, but that's the world we need to work in. And when I say out loud that we actually believe, we really believe that you can just shut all that off because you clocked in and it's just going to go away. When you actually say that, oh, that sounds ridiculous.
It is. Absolutely. 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 Oh my goodness. So you have your podcast host as well.
I am.
And have recently been doing this world tour, looking for, because I heard you say earlier that in your experience, when you really needed resources, you had to go out and kind of find them. And, your experience has probably been the same as mine. A lot of the resources that are available, they aren't here in the US. They really aren't. I mean, they just aren't. I mean, some of the scholarship is here, but in terms of some of the tactical stuff. So
true. In fact, the events I wanted, the things I wanted, I kept finding in other countries.
Right. So share a little bit more about what that's been like and how, has it been beneficial? Have you, what's that, touring the world virtually? And in your case, actually, you've been doing some world trips. So tell me about your world tour.
Yeah. So I was elected as the liaison between the HR technical committee, they called the TCs in ISO, which is a volunteer, but I was elected to be the global liaison to occupational health and safety because of my focus on psychological health and safety. So with HR, we're really focused a lot in that space. So, as soon as that happened, I thought, well, shoot, I probably should know what's happening in other parts of the world if I'm going to be the global liaison. So I just started reaching out to people on LinkedIn who had either titles that looked like it would be applicable, and I just started interviewing people. And they were all very gracious and kind. In fact, several of them have become affiliates of our program as a
Right.
result, but that wasn't the intention.
Right.
And so what I've learned is really, well, the biggest surprise that I had was finding out that Mexico has a psychological safety requirement,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Um,
Imagine that.
right. So our neighbors to the north and south have national standards that we
Yes.
do not have.
Yes.
That was actually the biggest surprise for me. Um, the second was how every single person I spoke to felt like other people, other countries were doing it better than them. Now, I haven't really interviewed Australia or Canada, so I'll see what happens there. But
Yeah.
actually, that's not true. I spoke to a woman in Australia. She focuses on agile, but and she was surprised that she wasn't even familiar with the national standards. So
Mm.
I feel like we think other places are far ahead, and they are, and
In
they
some
are.
ways, yes,
Yep.
yes, they're there.
But
Yeah.
there's still a lot of work to be done.
There's still an awful lot of work. Yeah. Yeah. My observation has been uh, simply the existence of a standard doesn't really get anything done. I mean, it's a start, but you can have all the standards. We have standards in this country about equal opportunity and how we treat people with disabilities and how we should, treat our water and our air. Not everybody does. So,
Mhm. Yeah.
yeah. So it's no different in this case. However, as I've said often, people tend to do safety related things for one of three reasons. One is they have this ethical, moral reason. They just think it's the right thing to do. The second group does it because, well, if you look at the numbers, it's going to save us. There's a quantitative benefit, and the bottom line for doing this safe. And then there's a third group, they do it because they have to.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't believe that this conversation is really any different. I think some are only going to do it if they have to. It is, but ultimately, and again, from a safety perspective, I'm okay whatever your reason was, because I evaluate myself based on my intent. I evaluate
Mm-hmm.
you based on what you do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So I don't know what your intent was, and in
Yeah.
many cases, particularly if it's my business, I don't really care because I can't. Did you do it or
Yeah. I think there's a fourth group,
not?
which
Okay.
is the do nothing. But it's pretend like it's not a problem, and like it's gonna go. Oh, well, that was just I get this. Well, that was just COVID. That was just COVID. We don't need to worry about any of that now. We're all good. And yet, the World Health Organization says the biggest threat to our mental health is climate change. So
Mm,
that ain't going away anytime soon.
mm. Oh boy. So this episode is actually going to run really, really near the beginning of the year.
Nice.
So if you were helping people make a New Year's resolution around, actually, because I got to get this in, because you are a New Year's resolution for the human resource people industry. What would that be? And then if you had to, also give some advice for people who are kind of interested in the psychological health and safety thing. So start with if you were going to that, that HR person, is trying to start off the new year with need some ideas about a resolution, what would you suggest for them?
To start with themselves. Mhm. So, um, practice self-compassion, self-coaching instead of self-criticism. That honestly, that can change your whole life.
Mm,
And there's plenty of data that shows that what that does is it creates new neural pathways that help you increase your pro-social behaviors, your nurturing behaviors, your ability to work in teams, but you're focusing on speaking to yourself with kindness.
mm,
So that's what
mm,
I would wish for every HR person.
mm, mm.
Um, Go ahead.
No, and again, and for those who are, you know, who are catching on to the trend, they're talking about, psychological this and mental health, and so if you want to start the year off,
Yeah.
what would you suggest to them?
Um, I would actually look at the ISO 45003 or look at the World Health Organization's guidelines and bake that into your strategy for 2023. You don't have to do the whole thing. Just, chances are you've either done an employee engagement survey or some things that are in the way, and that can be a resource.
Mm.
So I would say just get going, get started, make this part of your strategic plan, your initiatives that you're doing to help drive change within your organization, because without it, change isn't going to really stick.
Right. If it happens at all.
Well, yeah. The Project Management Institute says that 2 out of 3 projects fail.
Wow.
Given that most projects are probably in the millions of dollars, that's a
Wow.
lot of money that we waste.
Wow. So, okay. So, oh boy, where's the time go? So again, so there's the world tour. Share a little bit more about, you said you have affiliates.
Yeah.
How does that work? What does that affiliate thing look like?
Yeah. So, people who are interested in either delivering on behalf of our company or delivering on behalf of our company or offering this to their clients, they can go through our certification program and become certified to deliver the training.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So we've got 60 folks around the globe who've done that. And
Okay.
so they're either available for companies to tap into. And what I love about how this has worked out is that we also therefore have people from, almost every industry. Like, you name an industry, we have people who have a background in it. So,
Okay.
you and we have people in Asia, Europe, South America, like it's all over the globe.
Wow. And again, giving people some practical things, because there's a boy, there are books and there are seminars and there are webinars and there's like for the, you know
No.
I
These
can
are actual people with actual practical experience, so
right.
that as you're learning about these tactics, self-compassion is one of the things we teach. Because the science shows, the studies show, the research shows that can make a huge difference in your performance,
Hmm.
and in your ability to cope and recover. But then within the context of your industry, within the context of either your culture, your geography, the style and culture of your organization, we have people that can fit that. And that's been lovely to see, because they can bring their own background and experience to the learning.
Hmm. Hmm. And the certification process, is it a lengthy one? Is it, how long does it generally take?
Um, so the class itself is 5 90-minute sessions. So there's
Okay.
5 sessions, and then we do 2 more one on understanding the science, and then another on understanding the instructional design and facilitation. So it's about
Okay.
7 sessions.
Okay. Right on.
Yeah.
So yeah, you can get there a lot quicker than, completing a, some educational program or whatever. And it's just it seems more practical, you know. Yeah.
What's been amazing to me is, and this happens every time. So people, they sign up to be an affiliate, right? And they come in and they're there to learn because they're going to be teaching other people. And
Mhm.
by the end of the first session, what they say is, "Oh my God, I didn't realize how much I needed this class."
Right. Right.
They're
Right.
like, "Oh my gosh, this is good for me. What do you mean
Right.
I'm learning?"
Right. Right. Yeah. I do find that we are best in sharing things that, again, we have an abundance of ourselves.
Mhm.
It's like, if someone wants to teach skills in baseball, football, or playing chess, you kind of need to know how to play yourself if you're going to teach other people. It kind of helps,
Yeah.
it kind of helps. So if folks want to get in contact with you, what's the best way to catch up with you if they want to do that?
Well, I'm on LinkedIn, as you know, all over the
Yes.
place. So
Right.
Alessandria Polizzi on LinkedIn. I'm also on TikTok. I'm at Dr. Al Polizzi on TikTok. And I have a series called Your HR Big Sister, where I share all these things and more. Our website is verdantconsulting.net. We have a dedicated page on there, verdantconsulting.net/psych safety. And then the podcast is there. We have a Make the Case ROI calculator that will help you put in, based on your industry, based on your company size, what the potential cost is of ignoring this issue in the workplace, based on research around what those costs are. So, yeah, that's the best way to get a hold of me.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Al, I love you. I'll call you Al. It's always cool to chat with you. And like I said, it's good to know that some of the experiences I've had with people who have done the same kinds of jobs that you've done, that there is a way out. That, because I was really struck by what you said about the 98% burnout thing.
Mm.
That explains a lot. One of the things I've tried to get better at myself over probably certainly the last few years, is to be a little less judgmental of other people because of how they come across, or because they've got things going on with them as well. And I was kind of raised to kind of see the good in people, and it's gotten me kind of hurt sometimes because I just see the good. But even people who are trying to do good, they can spread their trauma to you because they don't even know they have it.
That's right.
It's been that way for so long that but it's so good to see someone, and again, with now, again, I know you've researched this too, but you've combined your experience as a human being with the research to now provide some opportunities for people to be better. And I just think that's spectacular.
Thank you so much. I
Yeah.
enjoyed our conversation. I always do.
Absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, we have a couple of other topics we're going to talk about here down the road. So, but again, it's been just such a joy having you. And for the folks who are following this podcast, y'all know I show up, once a week and bring folks on to talk about psychological health and safety and a bunch of other stuff that kind of comes up. But it's wonderful to start off. Really, this will be starting off a new year, and getting us into some other conversations that we didn't have in the past year. So stick around. You can follow us on LinkedIn, or go to my website. People, you have all that information already. And if you don't, you can catch us next week. So again, thanks very much for joining me on this episode of the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. And we'll see you again next week. You've been listening to the Psych Health and Safety USA podcast. To stay up to date with the best content on workplace mental health in America, subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts, and join the Flourish DX community at www.flourishdx.com.